Okay, I think we can start. So I hope you enjoyed the coffee break. And I'm here and happy to introduce the second speaker of this morning, Katrien De Moor. She has received her PhD in social science from Ghent University with a thesis on bridging gaps in quality of experience research, and it's challenging. Now she's an associate professor at the Department of Information Security and Communication Technology at the NTNU that I had the pleasure to visit a few years ago. And she will talk today about privacy, security, and the UX challenges in social XR. An overview. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sylvia, for the nice introduction. And good morning, everyone. Goedemorgen, for those of you who speak Dutch. I'm from Belgium, as Sylvia said, so I did my PhD at Ghent University. So very happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks also, Gu, for putting the bar there for an excellent talk. I think, hopefully, that my talk will be a little bit complementary. So there are some things that you mentioned that I very briefly touch upon, but I think overall, I will talk about a couple of other types of risks that kind of complement this space. So Sylvia already said more or less everything, but I want to highlight one thing. So first of all, some advertisement to come and visit in Trondheim, always welcome. As Sylvia said, so I moved to NTNU in Trondheim around 12 years ago. And I have been working on quality of experience before, user experience, so I consider myself more of a user person. But now I ended up in this department that is doing information security communication technology. So that obviously does something with a person to end up in such an environment. So and that's also kind of reflecting what I will talk about today, talk about privacy, security. I also want to mention that I'm involved in the editorial team of a journal, Quality and User Experience. I'll come back to that and give an invitation to the upcoming scholars sitting here today. And yeah, I think that's more or less what I wanted to say as an introduction. But as I said, my background human-centered, but then gradually also in the environment that I'm in, the types of projects that we had, became more interested in the challenges that lie in, making security usable, making privacy usable, and what does it mean for our practice of trying to create better user experiences. So what I will talk about, a little overview here, start with a very short scoping and also give a little bit of background of the work that we have been starting to do in this area. Talk a little bit about privacy and data collection challenges in XR and social XR, security challenges, user experience challenges very briefly. And then if there is time, I'll tell you a little bit about a short study that we have done not so long ago, and hopefully give you some concluding thoughts that you can think about during this week and discuss, and also maybe discuss this afternoon in the workshop that Jesus and Pablo are going to organize. So let's start with a little bit of scope. So I'm not going to spend much time here. I'm sure that you have all seen this before. Just to say that in this talk, I will not talk only about, I will give examples from the whole mix, from augmented mix to virtual reality. So many examples, Gu gave already many examples in her talk, so just keep in mind. And then one other thing also here is that I will come with examples that are not, are in a broader sense, could relate to collaboration and interpersonal interaction into virtual environments, into XR environments. And I'm personally also very interested in how can this medium, reach adoption, larger adoption in other sectors. So we had the social VR and so on platforms, but we are also very interested in looking at, okay, what can this mean in other sectors and what kind of challenges exist there? So, for example, I heard from Sylvia that some of you are working on health, XR and health. We will see, then looking forward to the posters this afternoon as well. That's one of the areas that we are looking into, but also education, remote collaboration in kind of remote manufacturing and so on, maintenance scenarios, but also military purposes and so on, preparedness, emergency response and so on. So basically, I think ultimately, possibly the reason why we are all here is because we see a potential. There are so many interesting challenges to tackle related to XR, but we also want to see this medium grow in other ways. And then it's also really about how can XR and safe and inclusive XR create difference in people's lives in many different ways. So that's why I think we should also really open up this space more and look at other types of sectors which come with different challenges. So here is one chart. It's already from a couple of years ago, again, to say that which kind of industries, which kind of sectors could be potentially very much disrupted by immersive technologies. And for example, healthcare and medical sector is one of the big ones there. But of course, it also means that there is a need for collaboration between different stakeholders in these domains to ensure that adoption can grow. And when I say we, then I'm talking about the people that I work with in my department. We are in particular also interested in the use of XR in so-called critical sectors. Critical sectors such as healthcare, which fulfill very important societal functions. So where there is a huge potential to benefit from the technology, but on the other hand, where the impact of risks that are not mitigated might also be very large. And that's kind of a background of the short case study at the end, that introducing a technology or a set of technologies like XR in those spaces needs to be done in a secure and in a resilient manner. And I think that's a big challenge, and a lot is already happening there, but there are still many open challenges to go forward with that. Not in the least because Gu already gave examples of underrepresented communities, examples of inequalities that might persist in virtual environments and so on. And I think when we look into different types of sectors, these challenges, they don't go away, they become even bigger because we are talking about different types of users and so on, different types of purposes and so on. So many challenges to address there. So then coming to the end of my scope and disclaimer a little bit, it's very important to stress as an academic, of course, that this is absolutely not an exhaustive overview. So my intention with bringing some of these topics to you is to hopefully trigger some interest. Maybe some of you are already working on some of these topics, but of course know that there is a lot more to look into. This is mostly based on existing literature, not my own work, because I have been working on different topics in the last years with kind of the human-centered focus in the middle, smart environments, ethical environments, and so on. But it's only more recently that we had started working on the one hand a project with these critical sectors that I will come back to, but also a project on immersive technology in the culture and creative industries. So just bear that in mind. As I mentioned also, I'm going to give examples of XR in the broad sense. So it's not only not always only about social XR, but some of these threats, some of these risks that present themselves, they would also apply in certain social XR scenarios. And then, I mean, I'm here. I'm not a technical person, even though I have been working with people with security background, communication, technology background for several years now. It's going to be more high level again, but in the end, I'll try to bring you back to open some thoughts and some reflections on, okay, what does it mean for our practice? And then I'm especially talking to the people who are focusing on the user experience and the experiencing part of these technologies. And then, a number of growing tensions. Gu already mentioned some of them, and hopefully we can carve out a few more together as going through. And no final answers, of course, just hopefully something that can trigger your interest and dig a little bit deeper into some of this literature. So first of all, let's start with a couple of what I called here privacy and data collection challenges in XR, social XR. We know, those of us who are working with optimizing experience, improving the experience, improving the sense of presence, that to create these realistic environments and interactions, the amount of data that is being gathered has been growing a lot. So equally with those developments, the number of privacy-related challenges have also increased. So before I move on, I want to try to involve you a little bit, or at least get a little bit of sense of what kind of backgrounds or interests people have in the room, because unfortunately I couldn't join the session yesterday. So just leave the Menti open afterwards. I will come back to it later on. I don't know if you can already see the question when you scan. Okay, so I'll give you 10 seconds to answer before I move to the next question. Oh. Okay, so I will move on to, let's see if this works. Okay, so take your time. There is another question. If you want to write something, no force, but it would be interesting to see at the end. If there is some time, we could have a look. So moving on, so I think one of the first, in a way, tensions that Gu has already talked a lot about, so I will not spend much time on it here, has to do with identity and these new possibilities for expressing or representing ourselves in these environments. So on the one hand, the number of possibilities there has changed a lot over the years, where in digital spaces, avatars can take very different forms. So you see the different examples here. Uploading an avatar that you make, or the second one there that you can customize, where Gu said that in some cases it's too limited and it's not possible to express those parts of your identity, of your personality that you would like to show. But then the other one also, of course, this tendency towards more hyper-realistic, photorealistic avatars, where basically our digital body is our digital twin, is really a digital copy of who we are. And on the one hand, there is already a lot of research kind of emphasizing that that's good. It gives us possibilities to feel this authenticity when interacting with others, to increase a sense of presence. It really helps for this interpersonal interaction and so on, triggers more engagement and so on, and emphasize the potential for trustworthiness towards others in virtual environments. But of course, it also has a backside. And the backside is that, we give away a lot of information about ourselves also in virtual environments. And I think a lot of your work also has looked into this extension of digital self-representation and so on. And you already mentioned it in your talk, how instances of harassment, for example, can feel very close because this extension of ourselves, because of strong identification with this digital representation. So then looking a little bit at the backside here, or the flip side, digital identity management becomes something that can be challenging for various reasons. So Gu talked a lot already about different types of harassments and about these boundaries that are not clear, where also existing differences and injustices could be continued. So racism or types of comments, also violence to digital body and so on. Some papers have already also talked about identity theft, identity misappropriation. And then, of course, in those instances where think of really photorealistic avatars, then it becomes really something very, very close to ourselves. So it's clear that there is a whole set of ethical and social norms related issues that need to be addressed. And I'm not going to talk more about that. And I think it was very nice to hear a very nice in-depth perspective on research already going on in this direction, on these codes of conduct and negotiating and defining these norms. but also legal implications. So some of the questions that this might trigger is, we are sitting here and we are aware that we have the right to have a private life and so on, but does our digital body have privacy rights? And if so, which kind of legislations, laws protect those rights? So I think, Alina, we just had a short chat in the coffee break. We'll hear also more about that later this week. So I'm not going to talk more about the legal aspects here, but I think this quote nicely illustrates the vacuum, the gray zone that is out there, and that is that the existing privacy regulations that we have, they don't really adequately capture everything that is going on, these new affordances and possibilities that come with the convergence of these different realities in extended reality. So then moving on a little bit, another report. So the report I showed before is one of a series on ethics and extended reality. Very interesting read if you are interested in that. But this is another one, and it's titled quite boldly about the erosion of anonymity and privacy. And I will make an assumption that I think nobody of us sitting here or standing here wants to contribute to research or wants to contribute to the development where privacy gets completely eroded. I don't think that's something we want. But at the same time, it's also a really, really important tension that we need to discuss more and we need to be more aware of, because as mentioned before, technologies that we work with, they require a large range of sensors and data to be able to create these immersive, realistic environments to meet different needs of different types of users, so to deal with this diversity. But at the same time, it has a lot of consequences and the cost is very high. So on the one hand, we are talking about these big human rights to privacy, to anonymity, but on the other hand, that there is really a real risk, and I'll try to show you a couple of examples that, and as mentioned, some of you might be working on this, where, do we really have control of where this is going? Because we want to exploit the potential of the technology for, again, linking back to these different sectors that I mentioned in the beginning, but on the other hand, the cost of getting there might be really high. And this might not be super reversible once we give up on some of those rights. So here is one example. So there are several very recent papers and also larger literature reviews that looked into, okay, what is actually being captured? I'll talk later about what we are aware of is being captured. And when I say we, I don't say the people in this room, because we are kind of privileged and have a better insight, but I'm talking about broader population. So it's not very visible here, but here you have different types of devices and classes and attributes of this data. So ranging from brain activity to voice and so on, movement and acceleration and so on, and the different types of attributes. But the category that is most interesting here is if we would put that together and we're not looking at isolated use, what is it actually that can be inferred about us by using these different types of sensors? And I think here it's really clear that it's a wide range of, in some cases, very personal information that can be harvested by the technology. And again, this reintroduces these concerns that existing biases might be reproduced. So if you look at some of them, gender, ethnicity, attention, but even further, affective state and so on. So when I'm talking about privacy and personal data, I'm talking about those categories in general, but some of these here, we could also talk about, mental privacy. Do we keep mental privacy in the way that technology is now developing? And what are the risks that introduces? One important one here is also bystanders, which I will briefly come back to. So when we talk about different types of privacy breaches and types of attacks in the literature, well, we could, in a way, classify two big categories. So One has to do with trying to identify the user, so trying to figure out who is behind the technology. And then there we see that it's mostly relying on head-mounted displays, hand controllers, and eye trackers also supporting. So providing information about the user and giving information a way that could allow to identify the user. Whereas the other big category here is user profile. So really this idea of trying to capture more information about not only who is this person, but also what are the characteristics of this user that could allow automated profiling. And here we can again distinguish between more direct and indirect leakages of information, where the direct ones would be the ones that are anticipated or that are part of the experience, but where especially the indirect ones could be very concerning because they are not intended and they might not be protected for. And interestingly here also to keep in mind is that these require different types of countermeasures or mitigation strategies. So looking at one recent example is a paper from 2023, which was quite important. This was presented at USENIX, a very large scale study. So they had more than 55,000 real users. They used an existing database and of course some ethical implications there as well. But basically, they could identify with an accuracy of over 94% from only using 100 seconds of data, motion data from XR devices. They could identify this amount of users. I will not go into the details here, but it's a very interesting paper to look at, using only 5 minutes per person for developing, training a classification model. And obviously, the implications are quite big. So it means that motion patterns in a VR environment, in this case, could be as unique as a fingerprint, could help to identify us, and even at such a speed, very fast. So this also means that there is a lot of value in targeting and profiling users. There is a large market already around that, we know that. But this also means that there can be unauthorized tracking and profiling of users. So another example here, also from 2023, and this was an de-anonymization attack, so trying to figure out who the user is, based on also, so you see the illustration here, you have the victim, the attacker, and both are in the virtual world. And the attacker has a virtual camera on. And again here, without needing to infiltrate the network of the user or without needing to inject any malware, this attack allowed to de-identify, to de-anonymize user based on the behavior of the avatar, based on the gait pattern of the avatar. And this can, of course, again, be exploited to link to real world, to connect real world and virtual identity. Interesting also here, just to keep in mind, is that these types of privacy risks, and there is a lot of literature going into different types of threats and attacks and how they could be mitigated. But they also increase, of course, as the exposure of users to adversaries, the terminology that is used here, increases. So you see here, of course, that the risk is much lower in single-user apps. If you then go scale up to multi-user, or even to massively multi-user, then also the attack surface, not only the types of attack, but also the risk of attacks is growing. So this is where we are, and some of the papers that I've included in this list to look at, if you're interested, is coming with very concrete examples of attacks that have been taking place. Because for those of you that are not familiar with this privacy and security. So what they do basically is they come up with an attack, they try to hack the system, they try to break the schemes, and then to flag this as a problem because it needs to be solved. So there are lots of papers with either specific attacks, but if you're interested in this, I would recommend to look at some of the review papers which make nice classifications of, just to give you an impression of the types of risks that are involved there. One other topic, just very briefly talk about, is of course bystander privacy, because when we are in a virtual or an XR environment, we don't only give away information about ourselves, but also about the people around us. And so I'll come back later to our awareness of what is being captured of us, but in the case of bystanders, awareness is even lower. So this has fortunately also been kind of getting more research attention in the literature, because bystanders, they don't have a possibility to opt out. They are not necessarily even actively consenting to be part of the experience. So some recent papers here have looked at, try to understand, how can you use privacy enhancing techniques to make sure that the needs of bystanders are understood and are met here. So, for example, one also recent study looked into different types of visualizations. So what they call bystander awareness notifications, just to inform people about what is going on. But not only to do this, but to do this in a way that it doesn't affect the experience too much, so that it doesn't affect the experience, the perceived presence in the virtual environment. So, and I think this is already pushing a little bit in the direction of where I would like to go, just to say that these kind of strategies and these kind of measures to, for example, in this case, to improve, to make sure that bystanders do understand what is going on and what is being captured, it needs to be done in a human-centered way. It needs to be evaluated. We need to understand what is the impact on the user experience. Okay, so now moving on to security challenges. I would again ask you to open the Menti. I'll just move the page and give you 10 seconds to answer the same questions, just to understand to which extent this very multidisciplinary community is working on these topics. So while you answer, I'll just see how many people reply. So when we talk about security, there are several properties that are very important. So I guess some of you have heard this CIA acronym before, or here it's 5 ones, the kind of the pillars of information security, and our data, user data, is being protected by using these pillars, and they are kind of desired properties in terms of security. Confidentiality here is, as it says, to ensure that sensitive information is kept private, that it doesn't go somewhere else, and that will only be available to the one who's supposed to, get access to that type of information. And one of the techniques that is commonly used here is encryption. Integrity, the second one here, is really focusing on keeping the integrity of the data, so making sure that the data are not fickled with, that they remain intact, that the accuracy remains, and so on, so that there are no unauthorized modifications, because this is also, of course, very important for trustworthiness. The third one, authenticity, is as we know that, that I know that when I'm talking to Pablo, I'm talking to Pablo and I'm not talking to someone else. So being able to verify this online identity, and I think this also feeds up into some of the very growing problems in that Gur was talking about, where there might be incidents. Availability is then making sure that the data is available to the ones who have been authorized to see it. And the last one, non-repudiation, is to make sure that, when I have sent a message, for example, and I have authenticated myself and said that it's me, that I can't say afterwards that no, it wasn't me. So these are very well-known security properties, and they are the basis of making so-called threat models, which try to understand, okay, which kind of threats are out there that could breach some of these important properties, and how can we defend from them. And there has, in the last years, been a growing attention also, of course, to what kind of threats are there in the landscape of XR technologies. So here is one example from one such threat model, specifically focusing on VR, where threats could target different ways. So one dimension here is about exploitation. So what kind of aspects of the system are exploited? Is it the system as such, or human sensory stimulus? The second one here is which kind of security property does it breach? The third one, how does it impact? And that's very interesting here. How does the attack impact the VR experience? Again, we make the link to the experience. And then also, what is the intent with an attack? It could be to lead to discomfort or to physical harm to a user, for example, or it could be for other purposes. And there are several such frameworks. Here's another example, which go into different dimensions of what is possible. And especially these two papers give a nice overview of specific types of attacks. And it's overwhelming how many attacks are already out there. And I think, I'm not sure for those of us, and I include myself, when I started looking a little bit more into this literature, I start to understand that I have no awareness of this, or not enough awareness of this, and that we should, because we are trying to create experiences, but there are these constraints that we need to take into account, because we can't ignore that these threats are out there, even though we can say that I'm focusing on the experience part. They affect, and they potentially affect in a large scale, the possibilities. So interesting or important to mention here, just two small things, is that not only is this a very broad landscape, but it's also new dimensions compared to other types of technologies and existing like countermeasures that exist. But also when we look at AR and VR, the challenges are somewhat different, and they then also need to be addressed differently. So again, a couple of brief examples. So one recent study was looking into, and this is more an AR example or a mixed reality example, was looking at mid-air interactions. So to make the movements and to make the experience more intuitive for the user. So for the user experience, good, to type in a password. But this was one example of an attack where they, with very high accuracy rates, were able to detect the password by having an additional camera. So again, one example where the user experience concerns and the security concerns, they need to meet, they need to understand each other, because otherwise, what is more intuitive, what is more, this would be, for example, in a kind of factory industry 4.0 example, use case, that it might introduce unwanted risks. So that's why we need to have those risks. We need to have a radar for those risks. One other example here, which brings also AI in a more negative way again into the picture, was also related to being able to steal the password from a user in virtual reality. So again, one example where the new possibilities, we need to understand what kind of attack landscape is out there. And then finally, one other class of just to show you a little bit of breadth of types of attacks is really more to do with the virtual, physical, perceptual manipulation. So there have been different types of so-called inception attacks or immersive attacks, where it involves hijacking basically the virtual environment. So a remote attacker can enter a virtual environment and change the virtual environment without the user being aware of it. Can again introduce new types of risks, but also lead to manipulation, for example. So and one of One of the recent studies also did also systematic literature review on type of deceptive design attacks. So, and that's something very different again than trying to figure out the password, but it's also related to the experience, and it could have potentially very big consequences. So, and here again, as the authors say, like the insecurity of XR systems makes this possible. This type of other category of exploitations, so deceptive design, so making the user believe something that is not true, but with a malicious intent. And the problem here is that much of the literature before has, of course, looked into this into a positive sense. So how can we make people feel like they are somewhere else, or they are in a certain environment, and so on? Whereas there is a big risk here that this could also be exploited in a negative way. So to sum up, new types of vulnerabilities and impacts, and they go far beyond because of the combination of different types of sensors and the whole ecosystem that is involved. Second thing here is that the existing privacy and security measures, they are not sufficient. So there is really a need for more collaboration and more focus on this topic. And again, third point, and that's kind of the key message of my talk today, is that this is inherently intertwined with the user experience, because mechanisms will impact the user experience and vice versa. The new possibilities, what is important for users, might again lead to new attack fronts in a way. So very briefly moving on, and there is a lot that could be said here, and there is a lot that is not included here, but here comes my disclaimer about not being exhaustive at all. But I just pick up on a couple of points. Again, I can't stress enough this tension between designing, inclusive, social, secure XR scenarios and applications that on the one hand protect users, keep them safe, so not on the safety dimensions, but also in the sense of privacy risks, security risks, but on the other hand, the experience, which we want to optimize, which has the cost of understanding, of capturing data, and so on, and which is also important in view of building trust. And that remains a big challenge, and I don't have the answer, but I think it's one of the big tensions that needs to be further addressed in the future. But also, as I hinted at earlier, how can we make users more aware of what kind of data is being captured? And so here is one also a chart from a recent study from last year, a very interesting paper. So please have a look, where they looked into what do people actually know about what data is being captured as one of the topics. And you see here, of course, physical movements and so on, there is awareness. But if you look at the category that is least populated here, only a very small number of respondents here was aware that information about their cognitive state, their emotional state, and even their personality could be observed. So there is a huge problem here, and that's something that is under-communicated also in the way experiences are built. So there has been growing attention here, fortunately. So there are more and more papers coming out that look into kind of usable and user-friendly and leading to a good user experience kind of mechanisms to trigger this awareness, to make users more aware of what is being captured, what are the risks now. But I think also here a lot more research is needed. And I think one bottom line here is that it needs to start from the offset, from the very beginning, by design, and not afterwards. And I think when looking at the literature, this is definitely changing, and these topics are getting more attention, but I think they need to converge much more in the future. And then as a final point here, again, this message about exploiting the possibilities that are there in the technology, and also in view of optimizing the experience, should not come at the cost that we see is there today. So then finally, because I see time is running out, I'll keep this very, very brief. in one of the projects that we are working on right now, is actually the first project where we are really trying to look at this privacy, security aspects in XR, as mentioned, really in the context of critical sectors. So this is part of long-term funding in Norway. It's a center on research-based innovation. So we are working closely together with different industries that are under the umbrella of critical sectors. And where we are trying to look at different types of technologies, so partly also on more smart sensoring in different directions in general as well. But where we did a study trying to understand, so what is the potential of XR in these sectors and with these partners that we're working with. And what do they know about the security and privacy challenges that exist? So in a first study, which I'm not going to talk about now, we did a mapping of how is XR, different types of XR, so whether it's VR or AR solutions used in these sectors today. But then in a follow-up, we are trying to bottom up understand which awareness do they have of these different types of challenges and how do they work with them? What kind of approaches do they have? So we did a first study there with some interviews, and we are mainly targeting like the CISOs, so the cybersecurity officers, the CTOs, the technical officers, or the CEOs, and really trying to understand what is the awareness there, and what kind of measures do they have in place? Which awareness do they have of these specific threats that are on security and privacy? And we are currently doing a larger follow-up, really specifically focusing at the medical sector, so using on the use of XR in health, which is, at least in Norway, I can't speak for other countries, a quite important one. And I'm just going to say 2 words about this. So this is the model again that I showed you before. And you see some of the points, it's green because there is an awareness. But then some of the other ones, especially the ones on the impact and on the potential to lead to physical discomfort, they are red. So our observations here, and more work is needed, of course, is that there is an awareness amongst these stakeholders. And as I mentioned, we want to contribute to taking XR, making it also exploiting these possibilities in other sectors. But the awareness that is there is really more related to traditional threats that are out there. So there is definitely a gap in awareness based on our initial findings, but also a big gap between literature and practice. So a lot more research has been done. There is a lot of detailed attacks and defense schemes and so on in the literature. But there is a big gap in bringing this to these industries where we would like to see these technologies be used for very different purposes to a larger extent. And then one last point here is also that relating back, we also talk with them about user testing, user experience, and so on. And at least from the observations from the data that we have gathered, we see that there is an issue here. There is really a gray zone. There is a vacuum that they don't really know how to maneuver. So at least with the stakeholders that we talk to, that they are afraid to exploit the potential, for example, to have more personalized experiences because they are not sure about the legal boundaries and so on. So that was very briefly about this short case study. So coming to the end now, some concluding thoughts. I hope that I showed you by giving some concrete examples the vulnerabilities that are out there to security and cybersecurity threats. Some even refer to unprecedented risks. And I think the more I try to understand a little bit of this literature, I think that the attack surface is really, really large. And there are also more specific attacks. And then I haven't even talked much about how the use of artificial intelligence is also changing this landscape. A lot of good possibilities, for example, the example you gave about moderating and having companion and so on. But in terms of security and privacy, this introduces a whole new space. So there is a lot of work needed to increase this awareness. The second one, which I think is also quite obvious, is about balancing these different concerns, the concern for preserving people's privacy, anonymity, and at the same time also really trying to find where the potential for making these experiences better for diverse sets of users. So again, trying to meet the needs for inclusive environments, inclusive experiences, but there is a balance there. So some of the things that have been proposed there in the literature focus on transparency, transparent XR data practices and standards, which are not really so strongly developed by now. Of course, the potential of privacy preserving techniques, but also the possibility to opt out. And again, as mentioned, not only considering users, the primary users, but also to a larger extent, and especially if we take these technologies to other types of sectors, the privacy of bystanders who are not choosing to be part of that experience. Finally, as I mentioned, I think that we can't think in silos here. We can't think that, oh, but I'm not into user experience or I'm not into privacy or security. I think they are essentially strongly intertwined and that a holistic approach is needed here and also a proactive approach and not a reactive approach to make sure that we can create these experiences by design in a truly human-centered way, so still preserving these fundamental important values and rights. So human-centered approaches to mitigation techniques in terms of privacy and security, but also the other way around. Which kind of constraints does this attack surface or the threats that are out there in terms of privacy and security? What do they mean for user experience and for the possibilities there? And I think you have a measurement session this afternoon, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe some of these things can be brought back there. And then final point, again, the ethical and especially also legal challenges that this introduces, and which I believe maybe Alina will talk a little bit more on Thursday, with these risks for high-risk use cases, so automated profiling in certain scenarios. This might limit the adoption, and I think this is a gray zone where there is a need for more clarity and better standards. So I'll ask you one more time before I say my last thing to go to the Menti. I'll just leave the question open. So I hope that at least for those of you who are not into this literature at all, that it gave you some pointers and some ideas of what might be interesting to have a look at. I promise to come back to the journal. So we would be very happy to have a special issue related to this spring school, if there would be an interest for that. So either if you're interested in submitting a paper, feel free to do so or to come and talk to me. Or if there would be an interest together with the organizers to have a special issue, maybe extended versions of your posters, papers, maybe you want to write something, maybe you want to share some experience. We're very interested in working, in hosting that and giving that a platform. And then I will stop. Sorry for going a little bit over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any question? Dangerous.
Nice catch.
It's a mic?
Yeah, Mike.
Okay, just testing it. So thank you so much for the lecture. It was so interesting. I just wanted to ask, could decentralized identity systems, like blockchain, for example, for users' authentication, provide a good solution for privacy and security problems? If so, how likely it is that big and major companies who are leading the XR markets are willing to do that or to use it, given that centralized data collection and control suits better their business models?
Very good question, and I'm not sure if I can give you a very good answer, but definitely decentralized approaches is one of the ways to go, especially with respect to personal data. So, but I think you gave part of the answer yourself in the second part of your question, that this is where this not becomes about experience, but it becomes something about business models, and whether it's about XR or whether it's about other types of cloud-based services that we use. I think that's the tension that we are really in the middle of. And I think maybe regulation can play an important role and policy can play an important role here. So I think in the technical fields that are working on this is definitely one of the, there you will find several blockchain papers or other decentralized model approaches to address some of these challenges. But I think this is really where the tension comes in with the commercial interests and the business models and so on. And where I think, yeah, as I said, different stakeholders need to meet, and where probably policymakers and regulation should take a more clear stance.
Thank you.
Any other question? Yeah. Can we try to pass the microphone? Because volunteers, they're not going.
I know.
But volunteers.
This is super
should
cute.
go. But
Yeah, thank you for this fascinating talk. I think most of us in this room are researchers, and we use XR devices and different wearables and sensors. And I wondered, as I was listening, whether through our research, we may be inflicting harm on participants in ways that we shouldn't. And I was wondering whether you have some maybe clear-cut recommendations for researchers who do integrate these sorts of wearables and sensors in their own research.
I think it was kind of a little bit the reason why I wanted to talk about this, because I don't have clear-cut recommendations, but I think transparency towards users is very important. But I think this is exactly the point, that this is also zooming out a little bit and trying to see the bigger picture of the specific work that you're doing using different types. You have a specific contribution in your research, but we need to think about what are the broader implications, and maybe also it can help you to, or digesting some of this material might also help you to take kind of an ethical stance on, okay, what should we really take care of now when we go, where do the boundaries go in what we are trying to achieve with using more sensors or having more accurate predictions and so on? What are the, already just having the awareness and having the reflection, maybe even talking about it in your papers, I think would be very good. When it comes to participants, I think, yeah, transparency is really key. I think we all have a responsibility to make people see not only the bright and shiny of the possibilities, but also the risks and the constraints that are there. So I think there is a lot you can do in that sense to just take a reflected critical stance towards these developments, and to also use fora like this or conferences and so on to raise awareness about these issues. Because I think part of the challenge here is that it is, again, also a challenge of interdisciplinary research, that a lot of these very technical contributions, they will never make it to the conferences where the UX researchers or the HCI researchers will meet. In some cases they might, but such fora are not really, abundant in a way. So I think being clear and taking also responsibility as a PhD student or as a researcher in not only the opportunities, but also having a really critical reflection about what does this mean? How could this be misused, for example, is super important. And I think that goes for all of us with the research that we do.
I can give this microphone.
That's a long throw.
Yeah, go catch.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. So I think what you mentioned about bystander privacy, it's very interesting, because in our own research, we also found it's super important because like some people said they want to record their like activities in VR so they could report like those incidents, but then like that violates like bystander privacy. I'm also thinking about like in live streaming, right? Like that's the very similar like problem is like if you like stream and or like record, there are like also other people. So like I wonder, how do you feel about this problem? Like if we do think like a bystander privacy, it's a new problem, or like a social XR, like introduce new challenges to protect the bystander privacy. Like what would be the new design to protect them, but also balance those like other people's needs if they do want to record this environment for like safety reasons. Like how can we balance like those different needs?
So the two studies that I went over quite fast, and there are more, of course. So I wouldn't say it's a new problem, but it becomes a more pronounced problem because of the amounts of data that are being gathered and the intrusiveness of the way this data, especially for bystanders, this data might be gathered. So I think one important thing is just to have more research on understanding what are, in a way, the hard lines for bystanders also. And also the one study was using different types of designs to indicate, to make bystanders aware of what type of information is being collected, or to make them aware of risks. But to do that in a way that it's not, ruining the experience and so on. So I think there is a lot going on and it's getting more attention, but I think there is a need for better understanding before coming up with really concrete solutions on how to address what these needs are and what kind of designs could, in a way, try to reconcile. So I think that it's not possible to have generalized solutions, and there might be a need for tailoring, but understanding where do the boundaries go. And again, this negotiation, as you also mentioned, I think is really important here. But it's good to see that there are papers or studies. There are more and more studies, not only talking about this is important, be aware, we should be careful here, but also really trying to think of designs that are human-centered and that they really evaluate the experience, they evaluate the pragmatic quality of the different solutions that they make to make bystanders aware. But also how does it affect the hedonic experience and so on. And I think it's also bringing these together more, having more studies to explicitly focus on this, and also understanding in these different types of settings what is important. Again, what are the no-goes? It's about finding these, the balance between what is unacceptable and what is acceptable. And then we need to make sure that those solutions are also, in a way, human-centered, user-centered, and also evaluated, not only in terms of did you get more awareness about your privacy or of your data, but also how does it affect the experience. So bringing them together, I think, is important.
Thank you. Super interesting talk. It was very eye-opening. I wanted to ask about, it was interesting to me. I kind of knew already, but seeing that, for example, from data collection, they could identify people just from their movement or stuff. That was very shocking that it was with such high accuracy. And for me, this is something that I've reflected upon because we are asked, especially as researchers in the European Union, to comply with the GDPR and to ask whenever we're collecting data that we should guarantee that the data is anonymized. At the same time, as researchers, we also want to publish that data, right? Because dataset help us and the community to build models, to build research upon it. So how can we deal with this, right? Like we might put our own participants at risk of being identified if we place this data online, but at the same time, we need that data in order to conduct research. So I don't know, I just wanted your opinion on it.
Very good question. And I think it's just also, again, about giving this a forum to discuss. So in that particular paper's case, they actually have a quite long ethical section. They kind of ended up with using this database because it was already publicly available. But also, in a way, their main argument is that this needs to be known. This needs to be known that, so yeah. I'm not sure if I have a good answer here, but it is, again, a tension that is there. And on the one hand, having databases available allows to kind of really show the hard numbers of how short time span, and there are several others that come with have used other databases and so on. But on the other hand, also, as you say, like protecting people's rights and making sure, because in a way we are informing people about something that we don't know the consequences of. So, and again, it's a very it's a big theme. It's a big dilemma. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I saw that there are other questions, but we are running out of time. So I will encourage you to, Katrien will be with us until Thursday. So I'm sure you will have time to ask her a question offline. So I would like to thanks again, Katrien, for a very nice talk.